Okay, let's dive right into one of the most fascinating parts of the Indian Constitution. Its many special provisions. You see, these are the specific tools that were designed to manage a nation with just an incredible amount of diversity. It's a huge topic, so let's get started.
Right off the bat, you might be thinking, wait a minute, that sounds like a contradiction, right? A document that promises equality for everyone, but then is absolutely filled with exceptions and special rules? Well, that's the central puzzle we're going to piece together. How do you build one unified nation while also protecting unique identities and, crucially, fixing the injustices of the past?
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at why these exceptions were even necessary. Then, we'll see how they work to empower different groups of people, protect entire regions with unique needs, and even set up special ways to govern tribal homelands and union territories.
You have to remember, when India became independent, it was a nation with massive social, cultural, and economic differences. A rigid, one-size-fits-all constitution, it just wasn't going to cut it. The framers knew they needed something flexible, a framework they could tailor to fit the incredibly diverse needs of all its people.
And this is the absolute key takeaway. These provisions, which you'll find in Part 16 of the Constitution, they aren't about playing favorites. Not at all. Think of them as developmental and protective measures. Their entire purpose is to try and level the playing field for communities that have been left behind for centuries, helping them to finally catch up.
So first up, let's talk about the provisions for specific groups of people. These are designed to empower communities, like the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, and other backward classes who were historically pushed to the margins of society. But, how does a community get identified for these benefits in the first place? Well, it's a very clear two-step process that's handled at the central level. It starts with the president, but, and this is important, the final say, the ultimate power to add or remove a community from the list belongs only to the parliament. This keeps the whole thing uniform and prevents states from making changes on their own.
And what does this support actually look like on the ground? It's pretty comprehensive. We're talking about reserving seats in legislatures to make sure they have a political voice. We're talking about giving them a fair shot at government jobs and education. And there are powerful national commissions that act like watchdogs, looking into their complaints and protecting their rights.
Now, it's really crucial to understand that a lot of these provisions weren't meant to be permanent, but the reality is they've been extended again and again. For example, reservations in the legislatures for scheduled castes and tribes were just recently extended all the way to 2030. That's a pretty clear signal that the work of creating a truly equal society is far from over.
Okay, so the Constitution doesn't just focus on groups of people. It also has special provisions for entire states. This is where the famous Article 371 comes into play. And it's basically a toolkit for creating custom-fit rules for states that have their own unique histories and needs.
In this table just shows you how flexible Article 371 really is. For Maharashtra and Gujarat, it's all about making sure underdeveloped regions get their fair share of funding. But for Nagaland, it's completely different. It's about protecting their unique culture and customs by giving their state assembly what is essentially a veto power over certain national laws. Then you look at Karnataka, where it's used to boost development and jobs in specific backward districts. It's truly a custom solution every time.
All right. Next, let's get into some of the most unique and powerful parts of the Constitution, the 5th and 6th schedules. These are entire game plans dedicated to the administration and, more importantly, the protection of India's tribal communities and their distinct ways of life. So first things first, what even is a scheduled area? It's actually pretty simple. It's an area that the president has officially identified as having a large tribal population. And once an area gets this scheduled tag, a whole different set of rules kicks in to protect the land, the culture, and the people there from being exploited by outsiders.
Now, the Constitution has two different tools for this job. The 5th schedule is the more common one. It applies across many states and focuses on protection and welfare, mainly through advisory councils. But the 6th schedule, that's a whole other level. It only applies to 4 states in the Northeast, and it creates powerful autonomous district councils that can actually make their own laws on things like land, forests, and marriage. The goal here isn't just protection, it's real autonomy.
And finally, let's look at the special provisions for running union territories. Now, these are areas that, for one reason or another, don't operate as full-fledged states, and are instead governed directly by the central government in New Delhi.
So, why do we even have them? Well, the reasons are all over the map. Some are major political centers, like the capital, Delhi. Others have a very distinct cultural heritage. Think of Puducherry and its French influence. Some are just strategically vital, like the island territories. They're basically a flexible solution for areas that don't quite fit the standard state model.
But here's the interesting part. Being a union territory isn't always a permanent thing. As you can see here, many of today's states, like Himachal Pradesh and Goa, actually started out as UTs. So it can act as a kind of transitional phase, giving an area time to develop before it's ready to become a state.
So, who's in charge? Well, unlike states that have a governor, UTs are run by either an administrator or a lieutenant governor. The key difference to remember is that these officials aren't just ceremonial figures. They are direct agents of the president, representing the power and authority of the central government.
Okay, so after looking at all these different provisions, what's the big idea? What's the main thing to walk away with? Really, it all comes down to a remarkable and delicate balancing act.
You see, all of these so-called exceptions and special provisions, they are actually the Indian Constitution's greatest strength. They prove it's not some rigid, dusty rulebook. It's a living, breathing document that's designed to bend and adapt, to hold this incredibly diverse nation together without forcing everyone to be the same.
And that leaves us with one final big question to think about. As India continues to change and evolve, what happens to these provisions? Are they a permanent, essential feature for managing a diverse society? Or are they more like a temporary bridge, designed to eventually be removed once a more uniform sense of equality has been achieved? That's a debate that is very much alive today.